there is something deeply resonant about Backrooms. It delivered the largest opening weekend for A24 ever. Also, the biggest debut in history for original horror, and the best start for a first-time filmmaker on a non-franchise film. With Kane Parsons being the youngest by far to have the #1 film at the box office via Variety. Even though I was kind of put off by what I found to be like sophomoric dialogue, like the characters are pretty flat, and they seem kind of like a 20-year-old wrote them, right? Like there's not much texture to them. They felt wooden. There was like a surreal horror that felt like it followed me out of the theater and into my dreams, actually. And, and the nighttime when I was trying to fall asleep, the liminal place between sleep and wakefulness. There's something about the manila walls and fearful, cynical views of its surrealism and folkloric potential that cements the ordinary outside as refuge, and its interior as a sort of like stuckness with immutable drudgery. Within immutable drudgery. So there's something about the Backrooms, not just the movie, the 2026 A24 movie, but also the preceding Y2K, early 2000s online phenomenon and lore that gestures towards a form of folklore and a form of liminal space world building that I think has genuine something. It has genuine existence, ontology. But then the movie itself seems like it's trying to posit that this space of liminality, this kind of like fey realm between worlds, this all places place, has it kind of offers this space up as something that can escape the drudgery of suburban hell, right? But then the monsters in it are seen as either NPCs or savages. The monsters in Backrooms are kind of purely set dressing or purely evil in a certain animalistic way. At least as presented in the movie. And maybe there is a gesture to something else that these creatures and this existence within this liminal, rhizomatic, reality-stretching world can bring. Isn't there something more to the potential that liminality brings, essentially, right? And then for my other primary text today, we've got Alison Rumfitt's debut novel, Tell Me I'm Worthless, which came out in 2021. It features a haunted house, Albion, that stands in for fascism, England, and the West in general, like the Empire of the West. It stretches across epochs, time, space, and bodily boundaries to lure people into itself, including two protagonists, a white trans woman, Alice, and a Jewish Afghani cis lesbian, Ila, who harm and traumatize each other in its thrall. So, as part of the house, in the house, they harm and traumatize one another. And that scene, the question of subjectivity and agency is actually dissolved, much like it is for people who spend too long in the backrooms. So as someone who has hurt and been hurt by people they love, it sticks with me in a way that moves me to change and find better love in myself and my surroundings. Its passages about the ubiquity and severity of fascist imperial dominion taunt in a way that feels like both a lament and a challenge. It feels like a text that essentially bears witness and does enough justice to the horror of the actual reality surrounding me as I read it, while also providing a perverse form of hope that actually operates through re-inhabiting the space where the fascist space, the space where harm and the impossibility of care occurs. Going in with somebody who you have harmed and who you love or desire or whatever it is, who is stuck with you in a traumatic bond. I mean, I'm not advocating, it's just as like there's something non-innocent, right, about the way that the protagonists navigate the space again and actually succeed in burning down that fascist house. Of course, the question becomes, is there really a house local enough to burn down, or does it already stretch like a mold into, or like a cancer, right? Metastasize into its surrounding areas so much that it can't really be stamped out or burned down in any one location. So it's a hopefulness and a cynicism, or like there's the ubiquity of the terror of the world that it sketches and inhabits also maintains a sense of like hope, or at least some sort of vindictive possibility, a possibility of changing the circumstances that relies on collaboration, essentially. So, if Backrooms represents a kind of mixing truck for the cement of fascism, it's churning, Backrooms might be kind of something that, where the actual, like, my position on Backrooms, which I'll sketch out, is that its sentiment is actually very 4chan-esque. Its actual depiction kind of like makes this sense that even within the surreal space, surrealism, which is historically a space that you can kind of escape the ubiquity of fascism, but it's trying to populate the surreal liminal space with a kind of fascist return and a fascistic kind of occupation. And it also kind of like offers a suspicion of that space, which itself, I think, portrays if not fascist, a kind of acquiescence within fascism by it's a cynical view that doesn't provide an alternative. So if Backrooms represents the kind of mixing truck for the cement of fascism, Tell Me I'm Worthless shows us the chute, a device that can both set it into place or spew it unplanned to make more difficult the runnings of the machinic ecology of fascism and empire. So basically, yeah, like, Tell Me I'm Worthless, I think, can show us a way out of the kind of like mire that Backrooms as a movie presents, but it's not an innocent or easy way out, but that the fact that it's not easy and that it's not simple, and that it might mess things up, I think that's the way that you can interrupt the larger engine that these fascist spaces operate within or usher us into. So Backrooms shows us how atomization leads to a becoming furniture in the fascist dream, Tell Me I'm Worthless shows us that being drawn to and traumatized by something can be entered into in love or lust or togetherness or haunted solidarity in a way that might upend some of it. Anyway, that's my laborious way to a tentative thesis statement. I'm thinking a lot about how to make solo episodes of Mutant Manifesto. And I'm thinking that one thing that I really value about this project is the way that it ambles and it kind of finds its way to conclusions, or they're like half-made conclusions. I'm not so sure that what I want here is a traditional essay with a thesis statement that I've fully concluded already. I think that that's actually one of the weaknesses of the academic style of thought and critical analysis. I think that what's interesting about conversation is its ability to generate something emergent and from its materia. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. I have a lot of sources and things that I'll be synthesizing, but generally I want to ask these questions, right? How is drab space broken up by both texts? And how does a broken space relate to fascist ecology? How does the brokenness or surreal space offer a critique of the inside-outside dichotomy that's useful for anti-fascist ends? And then how can inhabiting broken space like this with others intentionally create an alternative to the being overtaken and turned furniture of Backrooms ontology? And with that, welcome to Mutant Manifesto, episode 34. So I was listening to another podcast, Texas Overture, and they have an episode called AC and the Endless Interior. They traced kind of the origins of air conditioning in the Texas heat. And they talk about basically how this kind of opens up a whole horizon. And this was kind of part of a utopian, potentially, like American sort of ushering in of office life as something hopeful, as home life as something kind of almost astral, as Contain might call it, as kind of astral America, this kind of ascension within the 19th or 1900s American enterprise. Just like that, like any everyday domestic family could improve their quality of life in such a way that before was only dreamt of, kind of. There are also ways in which this is kind of an architectural intervention. There was a lot of architectural issues that came up with this. And it became actually, the first AC units were very toxic to human life. And throughout and to this day, like, air conditioning remains something that draws really heavily on the resources of the world, energetically speaking. But it does create this kind of sense of stasis, this sense of an eternal season that is like habitable. So by making some kind of interior habitable indefinitely, it strains on the external world in a certain way, right? I think there's also something that feels, if you're native to a world of air conditioning, there's something about the interior that feels like home. But I think that there's also something about the fact that your interior world can be indefinite and can feel eternal. That's like isolating and scary. I'm thinking about Renata Reinsve's Mary Klein, the psychologist in The Therapist in Backrooms, right? The lead woman. There's flashbacks throughout the movie of her living in this kind of agoraphobic upbringing, where you can feel the kind of sweltering heat outside being resisted by some kind of shuddering AC inside. And there's curtains drawn, and she's looking out into the world with sort of a fearful and curious gaze, kind of peering through the curtains, and then some kind of maternal figure, whether it's her mom or aunt or caretaker, appears behind her as the kind of like jailer and also protector. Don't wander out into that world. So there's a sense of this kind of captivity that this character grew up in. And interestingly too, there's also a sequence near the beginning of Backrooms, the movie, where Mary Klein is watching a childhood building being bulldozed, and she's seeing the handprint that she left in the cement outside of that little, cul-de-sac style little suburban like efficiency home. So there's already this kind of play between memory and nostalgia, and then the sense of the nostalgia itself being both a refuge but also something that resists the outside, that resists just kind of the complexity of engagement. So essentially, there's something haunted about the ecology, the suburban ecology, and this seems like a hot area. It's not really stated where it is, but there's the sense that Backrooms, the movie, takes place in somewhere like Texas or somewhere in the summer that's hot. So there's a sense that space to begin with, that suburban ecology, is itself a little bit haunted. AC in the Endless Interior, the Texas Overtures episode, it also talks about the hosts and their guest also talk about Rem Koolhaas's essay, Junkspace. Here's a quote from the beginning of it. Quote, "Modernization had a rational program to share the blessings of science universally. Junkspace is its apotheosis, or meltdown. Although its individual parts are the outcome of brilliant inventions, lucidly planned by human intelligence, boosted by infinite computation, their sum spells the end of enlightenment, its resurrection as farce, a low-grade purgatory. We have built more than all previous generations put together, but somehow we do not register it on the same scales. We do not leave pyramids." All right, so, there's something about the, like, air conditioning fits within that really well, because you think about all these spaces that could kind of count as this junk space. I think that some examples would be large malls, like indoor malls. I live near Mall of America, one of the largest in the world. These gargantuan kind of spaces. And for me, growing up, like, I remember going there, right? And all the rides, like the log ride or whatever that splashes you into the water. And actually, like, the chlorinated water itself is so nostalgic to me. It almost feels like its own form of some sort of elemental truth, its own form of some kind of primal pool that I was brought up in, right? Or some kind of, like, it feels like a true smell. But there's also something truly disturbing about these kind of animatronic and uncanny, right? About these kind of animatronic figures in perhaps like the Rainforest Cafe that sing a song or, like, roar at you and evoke something that's already displaced from its natural corollary, but that creates its own form of something essential in your heart as a young one. What am I trying to say? Junkspace. Junkspace would be the gigantic mall, or like literally it would be also like the spaces, I would say, in a mall that are yet to be completely developed or that are being transformed. I mean, the essay itself, which came out in 2002, right, was the first little part before the essay. It says, like, Logan Airport, a world-class upgrade for the 21st century, which is a late 20th century billboard, right? So this idea that coming into the millennial world, like this verge of the 2000s, there are these kind of projects. Airports are a good example. They talk about in the episode, in the Texas Overtures episode, they also talk about the gym. I think I just started going to Planet Fitness, and there's something really soothing about going to the same gym, having the same exact interior 4 times a week. But it's also, it's also something that is an intervention in the way that my temporality operates and the way that I, like, navigate space. Even being able to sit in front of my computer, too, in my room every day. Sometimes I do need to, set up a system of fans in order for that to work. But, in order to usher the limited AC that I have into that space where my computer is. But, I think that without the computer, I would have to go find stimulation and coolness in the summer heat elsewhere. So there's this, it's an intervention, but it's also something that I have experienced as essentially stable my whole life. Like, I can be in one place and live essentially my life in front of my computer. I can live in a mall, like, for an entire afternoon. I can live in one house without having to leave. I can chat with all my friends. I think it's probably time that we actually talk about the origins of Backrooms, because it's interesting here. Backrooms was originally started as a 4chan post. 4chan being a kind of like Wild West of the internet that was very fascistic in its it kind of resolved into a fascistic kind of breeding grounds, but also maintained sort of all these sort of anarchistic and kind of exciting forays into what it means to form a essentially unmoderated internet community. But there were these things called creepypastas that started coming around, right? It's like things that you copy paste and that are scary and that like affect your understanding of reality. Like they kind of tingle your spine because they feel like they verge the line between fiction and reality. Much like folklore does, much like ghost stories or goblins, the stories of goblins, the reality, the surreality, the possible reality of like goblins being along the path at night, if you go the wrong way or whatever. Anyway, there is this picture that was taken as this furniture store in Wisconsin was being remodeled of this, Manila. It's like at an angle, there's this row of fluorescent lights, there's these strange walls that don't seem like they should be there. And there's that, the original creepypasta was, quote, "If you're not careful and you no-clip out of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the backrooms, where it's nothing but the stink of old moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum hum buzz, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented, empty rooms to be trapped in. God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has heard you." Unquote. So, yeah, like, it's this, basically, from inside of these spaces, and this is probably an adult-ish person in 2002, where the internet was, like, new, right? So this is not an internet native. This is somebody who's used to navigating space, at least to some extent. And it's an anonymous poster, but you know what I'm saying. Someone on Reddit in 2002. I mean, on 4chan. So, I think that there's this kind of, like, suspicion of this kind of space, of this kind of, like, suburban architecture that gets kind of spun into this tale, this folk tale. And it's like what makes this original photo actually scary. I've had a lot of, I think that it doesn't look so bad. It looks kind of cool. There's something nice about it. There's different ways to interpret this yellow, strange, surreal kind of like space. But this reading of it, this creepypasta attached to it, adds a kind of cynicism. It's also saying that if there's any other inhabitant of the space, it's by default hostile to you. And to me, that betrays a kind of fascistic interpretation of this space that could potentially be a way out, or like a surreal rupture, a surreal sinkhole in the fabric of suburban kind of eternity and purgatory. I just wanted to also throw in here, and I know that I've been spending a lot of time focusing on this kind of rupture and what it means to be in a space. But I think that when we look at Gen Z, because now we have Kane Parsons, the director of Backrooms, who is a 20-year-old, right? And who born in 2006. So this is a super internet native. And not only that, this is somebody who's experienced, the COVID stuff at a very fundamental time in their life. And I think that this speaks to a lot of people of that generation I mean, not to be like a person who's like talking about generations, because I think that's kind of annoying, but like these technological developments and interventions in the way that we experience time and space are very relevant, I think. Because a lot of the times when people will be posting online like this liminal creepy space or whatever, again, as they say in the Texas Overture episode, sometimes it's just an empty hallway. It's like, what's so scary about that? Like, and then like as my friends, and I have been talking about, like a lot of the things that they think are creepy or liminal are kind of like nostalgic and weird to us. Like, she was showing me this like in like this abandoned mall in Michigan where like a bunch of seagulls are flocking all the time. They're setting up, and the local government keeps trying to get rid of the seagulls, but she really loves that the seagulls are there, and this like desire to go explore in that area. That's something that I'm really familiar with. I want to go look at abandoned chemical plants. I want to go look at like abandoned malls. I want to go check out the parts of a shopping mall that are being under construction. Like, I find that really fascinating. And it would be really nice to do that with people too. But there's something about the way that the Backrooms mythology operates that kind of determines that it is going to be a isolating experience and determines that it's going to be a hostile experience, which I don't think is always necessarily the case. At the same time, I don't want to let like these spaces off the hook for existing within empire. Backrooms is an American phenomenon of American origin, and Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt takes place in England. And those two places share a history of colonialism, which itself has a way of rupturing time and space and attempting to generate something that is essentially kind of like a monoculture, a copy-pasted, repeatable, cancerous, metastasizing cement of a singular form of existence, a colonial chain of being that is hostile to other forms of life. In Tell Me I'm Worthless, the haunted house is named Albion. Here's a passage from the book. I'm going to read a bunch here. And, I think it's okay to be a little bit disoriented. So, quote, "The house was an abortion, and she hated it with every fiber of herself. The house hated her back. It hated her and her deviant husband. It had sat there during his hearings, stewing with resentment at its unbeing. It blamed the woman, too. How could you not know? Of course I didn't know, said the woman, looking at the house's empty insides. My body is half-formed, a half-formed thing, said the house, but climb up my insides onto my first floor. Why? I have something that I would like to show you. Okay, we're going to pass through a little bit. There were many doorways on each side, but the rooms were empty, many without windows or with holes in the roof. None of them were the room at the heart of Albion. She knew it when she saw it. A door at the end of the corridor, the only door down the length of the whole thing. She walked up to it and then found herself hesitating. Push open the door and you will find the answers to your husband's condition. You will know everything you need to know. You will, if you try hard enough, be able to bring him back, cured of his ills. What are you saying? What you are saying, she said, is impossible. I am so much more than you will ever be. I can do so much more. I am the terror at the heart of this country, and I can tell this country what to do. I have been built new from the blood and guts of endless sin, and now I sit upon this pile of misshapen skulls, and I laugh at my newfound land. Okay. And then she basically hangs herself, and And the house says, I am Albion. Albion is all that is within me, and within me is all of Albion. So we... Am I still recording? Yes, I am. Okay, sorry. So we have a fascistic origin. Like, Albion is kind of like a creature. It's like this space is itself a creature. And is born out of this kind of, like, rupture within the kind of planning and zoning and, colonial infrastructure of the development of this English city, or whatever, block. So from these ruptures can emerge these kind of, like, pearls of trauma and pearls of strife, interpersonal strife, In Backrooms, the protagonist, Clark, is wrestling with a divorce, and he wanted to be an architect, and he resents his wife so deeply, right, for the fact that she was able to study law on his dime, So instead of, like, working out the relationship by being like, look, okay, so, like, I need this. I need to be supported in my architectural pursuits in exchange for you studying law. It was this, you can feel the resentment of it, that he has for his wife while he tries to process it and role play it with the therapist. In Tell Me I'm Worthless, there are lots of stories of traumatic relationships, including very abusive ones, that happen throughout the history of this space. And you can't help but think about the fact that, like, these abuses are endemic to the colonial project itself. And the kind of creation of England and the Western nuclear family to begin with. This isolated space where certain people, like the man, is given sovereignty over the bodies and livelihoods of the others, and the women are kind of asked to inhabit the space kind of eternally. I think it's also mentioning that there's this, like, demon called Valgavoth in Magic the Gathering's plane Duskmourne, which is basically, like, there's this rich family that used this demon, captured this demon in order to power their house, and the demon, as a form of revenge, began kind of possessing people one by one, and, like, creatures, non-human creatures too, like rats and stuff, one by one, and kind of expanding it was captured within this house, so it started expanding the house until essentially the house is kind of the thing that possesses the entire plane of existence. And it feeds off of the terror of its inhabitants. So there's this idea that you could even think of Valgavoth. One of my friends thought of Valgavoth, this, like, giant moth demon that was being captured by this family. They said, one of my friends was like, yeah, they used Valgavoth as a refrigerator. Which is kind of true, and it makes me think about air conditioning. And it makes me think about the abuses of the external world in order to create some sort of internal sameness, room temperature. But then sometimes the internal world will also rupture, just as the external world is being ruptured. And in that rupture is where either a fascist reactionary kind of approach transpires, or something potentially more hopeful. In Backrooms, Clark invites his coworkers, who are kind of, another extension of his dominion, right? Like he's got the two employees into the back rooms, and he's like, okay, you guys got to film this stuff. So then these two like young people who would probably be millennials, right? Or yeah, they would be born around. No, they'd be like my age. So these are like zillennials. These are like cusper zillennials. But at the time, this is set in 2002 or whatever. So I guess they're millennials. They're a little bit older than me. Anyway, so these two people played by, Catherine and Bobby, played by Lukita Maxwell and Finn Bennett. They, they go with him into this like backrooms place, and they're like dating in this show. And Finn Bennett's got his end apartheid, fast fashion produced shirt on. And they start going into backrooms, right? And there's this scene where they, and of course we've got Catherine, who's kind of protesting the whole time, like, what the fuck are we doing? We got to stop this. Like, we can't keep going. Like, this is too scary. But then Finn's kind of like that too, but like eventually he agrees to have a rope tied around him to go plumb the depths of some strange space. And as he goes down there, Catherine, his girlfriend, is constantly protesting the whole time. But her protests go unheard. And they kind of unceremoniously get swallowed by some sort of creature or whatever. I don't know. They get chomped up. But I think that disregard for the request of your significant other is kind of something that is endemic to the entering into the backrooms and the presentation of what the backrooms is, the framing of it. It's this kind of disalignment, out of alignmentness, with significant others. In Tell Me I'm Worthless, we have Alice, who's like the white woman, the trans woman, and she is, and then we have Ela, who's like the woman of color, who's a lesbian. And we have kind of this situation where they both have access to, like, they're kind of swimming in the waters of cancel culture, and they both have allegedly severely harmed each other, and they both have been harmed by the other person. So they're in this kind of like cancel culture double bind. But basically, so they're living estranged, like they kind of hate each other. Ela has become kind of a TERF to some extent, and Alice has posters of this like racist guy haunting her bedroom and isn't able to get rid of it, is too anxious to get rid of this poster that feels like it's, whispering racist things. But they have a deep desire for one another. It's almost like a kinky desire. It is a kinky desire, but it's a lingering lust and desire for each other. And that's actually something that fuels their reunion and their decision to go back into the haunted house, where there's this sequence in the novel where the text splits, so that there's two columns of text on each page instead of just one. And one column shows Ela's perspective, the other column shows Alice's perspective, as they severely abuse one another in the thrall of the house of Albion. So that's like the context of the middle of their like strife. But then they decide to reunite, and they like fuck and they like argue and they like hate each other, but then they decide to go together back into the house and essentially burn it down. And as non-innocent as this is, I see it as like an answer to the atomization and this sort of like kind of jaded emptiness of Backrooms. There's a way to the spirit that you bring to these spaces as liminal and as logic defying as they are, and as ubiquitous as they are, the spirit that you bring to them, I think, matters quite a bit. And if you're bringing the spirit of, you know, everything around you is hostile, and you're trying to escape your relationships, then I think that that's genuinely the result that you get back. That's the kind of copies of you that get generated. But if you come into it with a torch and a ex/current lover, and you want to end this thing that's traumatizing or terrorizing your life, then there is potential for you to burn it down, to truly resist in a significant way. There's this book called Necropolitics by Achille and Mbembe that talks about these kind of zones of death that we create in, for example, Palestine, where to cross the space is itself to risk death. And it's the kind of this control mechanism by the state using automated targeting technology. This is even before October 7th, but, you know, this is a long standing zone of death. But Palestinians inhabit that zone and create, you know, they maintain customs and celebrations within that zone of death. Still, in one of his lectures, Achille Mbembe talks about this idea that all these irrational decisions, you can look at Iran too, like all these irrational decisions that the West is making at the behest of like oil and AI and, you know, drone technology. He's like, why would we be making these decisions? And he kind of has this provocation where he's like, this is animism, like, welcome back to animism. But the idea of like, it's not a one-way direction between the human being and the technology being created and the technology being used. It also works the other way too. Like the technology, to some extent, is created through the desires and infrastructure of the colonial man. And it also inhabits and affects the person just as much. I think that that's a good way to understand that the outside of the Backrooms and the outside of Albion is a fascistic hellscape too. And it's a meeting halfway between the technology and the external world and the way that you inhabit it. Even if it is fascistic to begin with, if you come at it with a certain stance, there might be a way to. And I think a stance of solidarity is what matters the most here. There might be a way to truly resist it, or to live in a kind of refuge. So Clark in Backrooms, the protagonist, played by Chiwetel Ejiofor, Clark is a middle-aged man, a divorcee, a small business tyrant, and a black man. And I think there is definitely an Afro-pessimist way that you could look at this. I think that it would be really interesting to look at this movie using the frame of Afro-pessimism. I'm thinking about the way that, like, Frantz Fanon's white skin or black skin, white masks talks about these kind of projections of like racist stereotypes that you wrestle with and that you can't really escape. I mean, it is no mistake that when, and I guess there's something, you know, again, non-innocent about Clark, because he's kind of got this, like, at the beginning, he's kind of like, he's got this, like, pirate thing that he's going for to market his furniture store, but he's also got this, he calls it, like, the Ottoman or something, which is, like, pseudo, there's the sense of it being this sort of Orientalism and this sort of, like, racist projection that he's, like, taking part in willfully. But then, I think, like, I'm kind of surprised that I haven't really seen anybody talk about, like, the racial dynamics of this way that he turns into Pirate Clark in Backrooms. And this is when the woman, the white woman, is there kind of in a hostage situation, trying to, like, talk him down from holding her hostage. This projection of him as this pirate, this giant, hulking, you know, speechless creature with bulging eyes and a peg leg. There's something about that like could be potentially her projection as well as his own kind of reflection. That is the, like, main monster of the movie. Anyway, race aside, I think there's also something about the way that the peg leg itself really speaks to this kind of cyborgian link between Clark and property, Clark and furniture. This like backwards operability of his relationship to his store. And his, like, you know, I'm also thinking about how, like, he's an architect. He wants to be an architect. And this space is kind of, like, becomes his refuge. First, his store is his refuge. He just sits in the, like, display mattress and, like, watches TV. But then as he discovers the Backrooms, it becomes this, like, wondrous trove for him to disappear into. Much like the internet can be for somebody who's had trouble in their personal relationships. And there's a very 4chan way that operates. Delving into 4chan creepypastas, delving into Reddit, delving into Discord. Nowadays, delving into these, like, fucked up streaming sites where, like, you might accidentally see SpongeBob, like, simulate sexual assaulting, like, a poker dealer or something just by scrolling on fucking Instagram. But these spaces are, like, refuges because the outside world is annoying and difficult to engage with. But if you go through them, maintaining that frame, there's a sense of it solidifying that kind of, like, sense that everything is cynical and everything is out to get you. And so you may as well kind of become, and if you hold that perspective enough, then you do kind of become this kind of furniture-like mutation of yourself that just kind of sits there, splayed out, multiple eyes, tongues lolling around, not doing much, edible. But I think that if, you know, what would happen if you approach Backrooms with others, and you meditate, and you direct your focus, what kind of mutants can emerge there? And how can they inhabit and change the upholstery from within so as to genuinely create refuge together? Can you make an undercommons in the Backrooms? Can you create escape routes for people throughout history who have been enslaved or damaged? Can you create a way out of Palestine? Can you create ways into insurgently into fascistic time periods to intervene? That's kind of where I'm left with this all. Like, I feel like you gotta come through it with others. Like I think that there's a way to take Backrooms seriously as a genuine liminal space. But the fear is that if you do it using the type of like jaded ontology that Parsons seems to inherit from a 4chan genealogy, then the fear is that even exploring this like liminal zone, you solidify a kind of jaded, samey, cynical view. But I'm just saying that, like, I think that you should inhabit those spaces, and you should do it with others and with intention. Yeah, that's, as you know, it's a little schizo posting-ish, but I'm saying we should be schizo thoughtfully with others. That's what I'm saying. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. And I'm looking forward to exploring more of this kind of non-innocent online, kind of like Gen Z mind space. The mutant spirit still lives among us. There should be no attempt to fix us, our destiny to be unleashed. No clip from reality with friends. Seek reflections breathing or un. Feel them with and refuse refuge's refusal. Record before flight, and when you plummet back into the mud, how does it feel to dissolve, decay with me? Like the process of radioactive decay in unstable atoms, degeneration yields a more sustainable future. Destruction wages her war to lay with creation. What if the interval of Eros is not reducible to deprivation, but is the rhythmic condition of aliveness itself? The children kneel in dust and send it humming into motion. The monstrous vermin scatter. Kafka's philosopher runs breathlessly after the top. Already he reaches for it. Already he wants to still blur into something graspable, to close his fist around the bright little vertigo. Yet delight lives in the spinning itself. The moment the top stops dancing, it becomes the only idea of play. His curiosity remains dissatisfied as the monsters again gather around him, their many legs scratching at the root of his eyes. Or was it his groin? Or was it his navel? He scarcely has time to pinpoint their location amidst the frenzied shadows. The heart understands long before philosophy does. It contracts, it releases, it contracts again. A pause lives inside every proof of life. When I flatline, does life disappear, or only the interval through which I learn to move through it? I can't make a sound unless there is inhale, exhale. If I cannot make a sound, surely the screaming will turn itself inside out and eat me for breakfast. It is only in the interval I am given strength to beat my chest, cries of pride. I exist perhaps as something holy only through time, keeping rhythm to mark my duration, infinity as eternal recurrence. Every living thing I have ever loved moves by meeting in the corner spaces where inside-outside meet. Tides, lungs, language, grief, migration, patterns, menstrual blood, sleep. Even stars survive by tearing themselves apart. I think this is why lovers touch each other with such terror. To touch requires two surfaces remaining strange to one another. Repetition, difference. Repetition, difference. Repetition, difference. Dissatisfied when the top stops on me. Alienated from my own pleasures once it's secured in my back pocket. Let them keep spinning. I'm curious, so this spin must continue translating.